Royce Barrett's hands shook as he adjusted his tie, watching the church door with dread. The woman about to become his wife was a complete stranger, one who would, in half a year's time, rescue his life, his land, and transform everything he believed about himself. The morning light streamed through the chapel windows as Royce wiped perspiration from his brow, despite the crisp air. His father, Cyrus Barrett, occupied the front bench with folded arms, his steely gaze locked on his son like a predator studying its target. There was no turning back now. The mounting debts, the pressing creditors, and this arranged union represented the sole path to preventing the Barrett homestead from falling into enemy hands. Magnolia Voss proceeded down the narrow aisle, her modest tin gown whisking softly with every step. Royce's heart sank as he observed her fuller figure and plain features. This bore no resemblance to the wedding he had envisioned. He had fantasized about taking a beautiful bride, someone who would inspire jealousy in other men. Instead, he found himself bound to an unknown woman whose father controlled the neighboring property that included water access more precious than silver in this parched region. "Stay calm," he murmured to himself, his fingers trembling. "This is merely a transaction, nothing personal." Yet as Magnolia drew near, something startling occurred. She raised her eyes to meet his directly, and rather than the embarrassment or anxiety he anticipated, he glimpsed something entirely different. Her stare was unwavering, almost defiant, as though she could decipher every notion spinning through his consciousness. "Mr. Barrett," she spoke softly upon reaching the altar, her tone carrying an unexpected authority. "Miss Voss," he responded, his words barely audible. The minister commenced his customary ceremony, but Royce scarcely absorbed the words. His thoughts churned with bitterness toward his father, toward this predicament, toward the woman beside him who embodied everything he sought to avoid. He imagined the townsmen who would mock him privately, the cruel remarks they would make about his substantial wife. When the preacher inquired if he accepted Magnolia as his spouse, Royce's affirmation emerged hollow and mechanical. However, when Magnolia recited her promises, her voice resonated clearly and boldly throughout the modest chapel, and something in her delivery compelled him to regard her anew. Her gaze wasn't lowered or apologetic. It burned with an intensity he hadn't previously detected. When she declared, "I do," it sounded less like submission and more like a battle cry. The wedding band felt weighty on his hand as they exited the church together. But what seemed even more burdensome was the awareness that he understood nothing about the woman he had just wed. From her bearing, erect and dignified despite the murmurs from the small gathering, he sensed she possessed depths beyond her appearance. Royce had no notion that before their wedding day concluded, Magnolia would demonstrate just how perilous it was to misjudge her capabilities. The journey to the Barrett homestead stretched endlessly. Magnolia sat alongside him on the wagon bench, her hands clasped in her lap, maintaining silence. Yet her quietude wasn't meek or yielding. It resembled the stillness preceding a tempest. "I assume you'll wish to inspect the house," Royce finally ventured, desperate to ease the strain. His voice emerged more gruff than intended. "I've already examined it," Magnolia replied without glancing his way. "3 occasions, actually, while you were in town, drowning your sorrows about this marriage." Royce's grip tightened on the reins. How had she discovered his visits to the tavern? He believed he had been discreet. "I'm unfamiliar with your meaning." "Naturally you aren't." Her tone now carried hints of amusement. "Just as you're unaware that your ranch workers have been selling your livestock to settle their personal debts, or that your father owes money throughout half the territory, not solely to my family. The wagon struck a pothole, jolting them both, but Royce barely registered it. His mind was spinning. That's impossible. These hands have served us for years. Loyalty doesn't fill empty stomachs, Mr. Barrett, and desperate individuals resort to desperate measures. Magnolia finally turned toward him, her eyes holding knowledge that made his stomach plummet. Your foreman, Wade McKinley, has been embezzling from cattle transactions for 6 months. Your father is aware but cannot dismiss him because Wade is the only reason the other workers haven't abandoned their posts. When they arrived at the ranch house, Royce remained frozen in the driver's position, viewing his property through fresh eyes. The leaning fence posts he had overlooked, the neglected corral requiring maintenance, the diminished herd in the pasture. Suddenly, everything made sense. His father hadn't merely gambled away their funds. They had been hemorrhaging money from numerous sources, and this marriage served as a bandage, not a remedy. "How do you possess this knowledge?" he asked, his voice barely perceptible. "Because I've been preparing for this union longer than you have," Magnolia responded, dismounting the wagon with unexpected elegance. "My father didn't arrange this alliance merely for land access, Mr. Barrett. He orchestrated it because your ranch controls water rights for 3 counties. However, someone must possess the intelligence to make it profitable." She approached the house, then hesitated at the front steps. "The question remains whether you're wise enough to listen or too proud to prevent losing everything while pretending you understand better." Royce observed her vanish through the entrance of what was now their shared home, his thoughts swirling with questions. Who was this woman? How had she acquired such extensive knowledge about his family's affairs? Most troubling of all, what additional information did she possess that escaped his awareness? As he unharnessed the horses, one thought persistently nagged at him. If Magnolia understood this much about his difficulties, what precisely was her strategy to resolve them? By nightfall, Royce learned that wedding Magnolia was like welcoming a whirlwind into his residence. Everything familiar was about to be reorganized. He discovered her in his father's office, seated behind the imposing oak desk as though she owned it. Papers were arranged before her like a strategic plan: account ledgers, property deeds, and what appeared to be legal documents covering every surface. What chilled his blood was seeing Wade McKinley standing before the desk like a schoolchild summoned to face the headmaster. "What's happening here?" Royce demanded, entering the room. Wade's complexion had paled, perspiration forming on his forehead. "Your wife? She's discovered the cattle situation." "Naturally I have," Magnolia stated calmly, not lifting her eyes from the paperwork. "I know you've been selling 15 head monthly while reporting only 10. I know you've been keeping the difference. And I know you intended to blame rustlers when the accounting eventually surfaced." Royce felt reality shift beneath him. The figures had never balanced. However, his father had always managed the books, and Wade had been like family. "Wade, tell me this isn't accurate." The foreman's shoulders slumped. "The ranch was failing anyway, Royce. I have children to support." "You had," Magnolia corrected, her voice sharp as steel. "You had employment. Now you face a choice. Restore what you've stolen, or I'll summon the sheriff before dawn." Wade's expression suddenly hardened. "You think you can simply march in here and issue commands? You're nobody, just some hefty woman whose father paid to dispose of her." The silence that ensued was profound. Royce expected Magnolia to wilt, to retreat from the harsh words. Instead, she rose slowly, her movements calculated and controlled. "Mr. McKinley," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "you appear to believe My size reflects my capabilities. That's your initial error. She opened the desk drawer and retrieved a small leather journal. Your second mistake was assuming I arrived unprepared. She opened the journal and began reciting. May 15th. Sold 20 head to Morrison's Group. Reported 12. May 22nd. Sold 18 head to the railroad camp. Reported 10. June 3rd. She looked up at Wade, whose face had turned ashen. Shall I continue? Because I possess 4 months of detailed records, including every buyer's name and the exact amount you pocketed. Wade's hand instinctively moved toward his weapon, but froze when Magnolia's voice cut through the air. I wouldn't recommend it, she said quietly, because your third mistake was thinking I came here unaccompanied. The sound of boots on the front porch made everyone turn. Through the window, Royce could see 3 men approaching the house, strangers whose hard faces and positioned firearms marked them as far from ordinary ranch hands. Who are they? Royce whispered. Magnolia smiled for the first time since their meeting. It wasn't a gentle expression. Insurance, Mr. Barrett. The kind that ensures people honor their agreements. Wade bolted for the exit, but found his path blocked by the largest of the 3 men who had just entered. The stranger was built like a mountain, with scarred knuckles and eyes that had witnessed excessive violence. Departing somewhere, friend? The big man asked pleasantly. What followed next would teach Royce that he had married far more than merely his father's solution to their financial troubles. The confrontation lasted precisely 3 minutes. Wade McKinley, confronted by 3 armed men and a woman who knew every detail of his theft, collapsed like a house of cards in a windstorm. The money's concealed in my cabin, Wade stammered. His earlier bravado completely vanished. Most of it, anyway. I spent some on medicine for my youngest. The fever nearly claimed her life. Magnolia's expression softened slightly. How much did the medicine cost? $40. Then you'll return the remainder and consider the $40 your severance pay. She nodded to the large man blocking the door. Hank will escort you to collect it. Then you'll be gone by morning. As Wade was led away, Royce grasped Magnolia's arm. Wait, who are these men? How do you know them? For the first time since their meeting, Magnolia appeared uncertain. That's complicated. Complicated how? Royce's grip tightened. My foreman just confessed to stealing from me because 3 armed strangers entered my house. I believe I deserve an explanation. Magnolia pulled free and moved to the window, observing as Hank escorted Wade toward the bunkhouse. My father didn't arrange this marriage solely for the land, Royce. He orchestrated it because your ranch controls the most valuable water rights in 3 territories. However, other parties desire those rights. Dangerous parties. What kind of dangerous parties? The kind who would prefer to see you dead rather than see you prosper. She turned back to him, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes. 3 weeks ago, a man named Cormac Dullen made an offer for your ranch. When your father refused, Dullen made it clear that accidents befall stubborn ranchers. Royce felt his stomach drop. You're saying someone wants to murder me? I'm saying someone wants to eliminate anyone who controls this land. That's why my father moved so rapidly with this marriage. That's why I brought protection. She gestured toward the men outside. And that's why we must cooperate, whether you favor me or not. Before Royce could respond, a gunshot echoed from the bunkhouse direction. Through the window, they saw Hank staggering backward, clutching his shoulder, while Wade McKinley mounted a horse with a rifle in his hands. He was prepared for this, Magnolia breathed. He knew we would discover his theft. Another shot shattered the study window, sending glass cascading across the floor. Royce grabbed Magnolia and pulled her down behind the desk as bullets splintered the wooden walls around them. "Stay down," he shouted, reaching for his gun belt. However, when he peered around the desk's edge, his blood ran cold. Wade wasn't alone. At least 6 riders had appeared at the property's perimeter, all armed, all advancing toward the house with lethal intent. "Magnolia," Royce said, his voice tight with realization. "How did Wade know we were coming for him tonight?" Her face paled as the terrible truth struck them both. "Because someone informed him we would be." The house erupted into chaos as bullets pierced through the walls like deadly rain. Royce crawled toward the gun cabinet while Magnolia pressed herself against the floor behind the heavy desk. "How many men do you have?" Royce shouted over the gunfire. 3, Magnolia called back. "But Hank's wounded, and the other 2 are pinned down in the barn." Royce realized they were outnumbered 2 to 1, trapped in a house not constructed to withstand a siege. As he reached for his rifle, something made him freeze. Through the broken window, he could see Wade pointing directly at the study, gesturing to the other riders, as if he knew exactly where they were hiding. "Magnolia," he said slowly, "Wade couldn't have known we'd be in this room unless someone revealed our plan." She finished his thought, her face grim. "Someone who knew I was going to confront him tonight. But who? The only people aware were us and my men outside. Unless your father. Where is he?" "He departed for town immediately after the wedding. Said he had business to handle." Magnolia's eyes widened with understanding. "But he's the only one who knew the timing." A fresh volley of gunfire shattered what remained of the windows. Outside, Wade's voice rose above the noise. "Burn them out. The house is old timber. It'll ignite quickly." The scent of smoke began drifting through the broken windows, and orange light flickered against the walls. They had set fire to the front porch. "We must move," Royce said, grabbing ammunition from the cabinet. "The back door is covered." Magnolia interrupted. "I saw 2 riders circle around. They were trapped between fire and bullets with no escape route." As the smoke thickened, Magnolia did something that completely shocked Royce. She stood up, walked calmly to the desk, and began stuffing papers into a leather satchel. "What are you doing?" Royce demanded. "We need to evacuate. These documents are worth more than this house," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The real reason Wade betrayed you, the real reason Cormac Dullen wants this land, it's all here." She produced a map covered in red markings and legal notations. "This isn't merely about water rights, Royce. There's a railroad coming through this territory. Your ranch sits directly in the path of the proposed route. Whoever owns this land will become wealthy beyond imagination." Before Royce could process this revelation, the front wall of the house exploded inward as burning timbers crashed through the room. The fire was spreading faster than anticipated, and the smoke was becoming lethal. "The root cellar." Royce grabbed Magnolia's hand. "There's a tunnel leading to the barn." They ran toward the kitchen as the ceiling began collapsing behind them. As they reached the cellar door, Royce heard something that made his blood freeze. His father's voice calling out from the yard. "Roy, son, are you in there?" Cyrus Barrett had returned. From the tone of his voice, he seemed genuinely surprised by the fire. The root cellar tunnel was older than Royce remembered, the wooden supports creaking ominously as they crawled through the narrow passage. Behind them, the sound of the burning house grew fainter. But ahead lay the unknown danger of whoever might be waiting at the barn. "Your father sounds genuinely surprised," Magnolia whispered as they moved through the darkness. "Then who warned Wade?" Royce asked. Even as he spoke, a terrible possibility was forming in his mind. They emerged into the barn to find Hank sitting against a hay bale, his shoulder roughly bandaged, but his gun still in his hand. The other two men, whom Magnolia introduced as Frank and Cole, were positioned at the barn doors, watching the burning house. "Ma'am," Hank said when he saw them, "we have a problem. That foreman of yours knew exactly where we'd be positioned. Knew about the tunnel, too." Royce felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. "Magnolia, who else knew you were coming here tonight? Who else knew your exact plan?" Her face went pale in the flickering light of the fire. "Only my father." And she stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. "And my father's business partner, the man who helped arrange all the marriage details, who knew about the railroad survey, who had access to all the financial records of both our families." Her voice broke. "Ezekiel Marsh, my own father." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Her father hadn't just arranged this marriage to save the Barrett Ranch. He had arranged it to destroy it. But why? Outside, Cyrus Barrett's voice grew more frantic. "Royce, the house is lost, but if you're alive, answer me." "He's not part of this," Royce realized. "My father truly doesn't know." Before they could decide whether to trust Cyrus, Frank called out from the barn door, "Riders coming, at least 10 of them, and they're not here to help fight the fire." Through the barn door, Royce could see torches approaching across the darkened ranchland. These weren't concerned neighbors. They rode in formation, weapons ready, moving with military precision. "Cormac Dullen," Magnolia breathed. "This was all planned. The marriage, Wade's theft, the confrontation tonight. It was all designed to flush us out so Dullen could finish this." Royce understood that they had walked directly into a trap that had been months in the making. His marriage to Magnolia hadn't been a solution to his problems. It had been the final piece of someone else's plan to destroy everything he owned. "Your father sold us out," he said, though the words tasted bitter. "But why? What does he gain from our deaths?" Magnolia's face hardened with the resolve Royce was beginning to recognize. "Everything. With both of us dead, he inherits my portion of the land deal and gets to sell water rights to Dullen without interference, plus whatever Dullen promised him for delivering your ranch." As the riders drew closer, Magnolia reached into her satchel and pulled out something that made Royce's breath catch. It was a second map, one she hadn't shown him before, covered in different markings and signed with official seals. "What is that?" "Insurance," she said grimly. "And the real reason my father wants me dead tonight." The second map showed something that changed everything. Railroad routes, water rights, and land ownership, but with one crucial difference. This map bore the official seal of the territorial government and was signed by the railroad commissioner himself. "This is the real railroad route," Magnolia explained quickly as the sound of approaching horses grew louder. "The one Dullen and my father don't know exists. The railroad isn't coming through your ranch, Royce. It's coming through the valley 3 miles south, through land that becomes worthless without access to your water rights." Royce realized that everything, the threats, the marriage, the planned destruction, was based on false information. But if Dullen discovers the real route, he doesn't. Only 3 people have seen this map: the railroad commissioner, myself, and now you. Magnolia's eyes blazed with determination. "I've been playing a longer game than anyone realized, including my father." Their revelation was interrupted by gunfire erupting outside the barn. Through the doorway, they could see Cyrus Barrett diving for cover behind a water trough as Dullen's men surrounded him. "They're going to kill him," Royce said, moving toward his rifle. "Wait." Magnolia grabbed his arm. "Dullen needs your father alive to sign over the deed. This is about more than just taking the land. It's about making it legal." Sure enough, They heard Dullen's voice booming across the yard. "Cyrus Barrett, I know you're alive. I have a proposition for you." From their hiding spot, they watched as Dullen himself rode into the firelight. A tall man with silver hair and cold eyes that reflected the flames of the burning house. He dismounted slowly, confidently, like a man who had already won. "Your son is dead, Cyrus," Dullen called out. "Burned up with his hefty bride. But you can still save yourself. Sign over the ranch deed, and I'll let you ride away with enough money to start over." Cyrus Barrett surprised everyone. Instead of cowering, he stood up from behind the water trough, his own gun drawn. "My son isn't dead, Dullen. And even if he was, I wouldn't sell his ranch to scum like you." The standoff that followed lasted exactly 10 seconds. Dullen's men outnumbered Cyrus 20-1, and the old rancher knew it. But he didn't back down. "Kill him," Dullen ordered casually. That's when Magnolia did something that proved once and for all that Royce had married a woman unlike any other. She stepped out of the barn, hands raised, the government map clearly visible in her grip. "Mr. Dullen," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard, "before you make any permanent decisions, you might want to see what I'm holding." Every gun turned toward her, but Magnolia walked forward with the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. "This is the real railroad survey, signed and sealed by the territorial commissioner, and it shows that you've been planning to steal land that will be worthless in 6 months. Dullen's face went white as he recognized the official seals on the document, but his recovery was swift and deadly. "Then I guess I'll have to kill all of you and find another way to make money from this territory." As his men raised their weapons, Magnolia smiled. The same dangerous smile Royce had seen in the study earlier. "That would be a mistake, Mr. Dullen, because the territorial marshal is already on his way, and he has very specific instructions about what to do with claim jumpers and murderers." The sound of approaching hoofbeats from the east made everyone freeze. But instead of more of Dullen's men, what emerged from the darkness was a sight that made the claim jumpers' face go ashen. 6 territorial marshals, badges gleaming in the firelight, rifles ready. "Marshal Thompson," Magnolia called out calmly. Perfect timing. Dullen spun toward her, his face twisted with rage and confusion. "This is impossible. How did you—" "Send word 3 days ago." Magnolia finished. "The same day, I discovered my father's plan to have us both killed. Did you really think I would walk into this marriage blind?" As the marshals surrounded Dullen's men, the truth of Magnolia's strategy became clear. She hadn't just married Royce to save his ranch. She had orchestrated an elaborate trap to bring down the entire criminal conspiracy that threatened the territory. "Cormac Dullen," Marshal Thompson announced, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, illegal land seizure, and bribery of territorial officials." Dullen made one last, desperate play. He grabbed for his gun, shouting to his men, "Kill them all." The gunfight that followed lasted less than 30 seconds. Dullen's hired guns, caught between the marshals and Magnolia's men, surrendered quickly when they realized they were outmatched and legally outgunned. Dullen himself took a bullet in the shoulder when he tried to shoot Marshal Thompson, ending his threat permanently. As the dust settled and the marshals led the criminals away, Royce found himself standing next to his wife in the ruins of his burned home, finally understanding what he had gained and lost in a single day. "You planned all of this," he said, not as an accusation, but as amazed recognition. "I planned to survive," Magnolia replied, "and to ensure that you could too." "But why?" "You could have walked away. Let Dullen destroy everything. Why risk your life for a man who didn't want to marry you?" Magnolia turned to face him, and in the dying firelight, Royce saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Because I saw who you really were, Royce Barrett. Not the prejudiced man who judged me by my appearance, but the man who would sacrifice everything to protect his family. The man who crawled through a burning tunnel to save someone he barely knew. Royce realized that while he had been focused on what he thought he was losing, he had been blind to what he was actually gaining. Magnolia wasn't just intelligent and brave. She was loyal, strategic, and had risked everything to save not just herself, but him and his father. The railroad money, he said suddenly. The real route will make us wealthy, but not the way anyone expected. Magnolia smiled. The new route needs water rights for the station depot. Our water rights. Legally, fairly, and profitably. 6 months later, Royce Barrett stood on the porch of his rebuilt home, watching his wife direct the construction of a new railroad station. She had been right about everything: the route, the profit, and most importantly, about the value of looking beyond appearances to see what truly mattered. He had been forced to marry a stranger he judged too quickly. What he discovered was a partner who saved his life, his ranch, and taught him that real strength comes in forms he never expected to recognize. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable story where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected.
Ezekiel Marsh found himself at the altar beside the largest woman he'd ever encountered, fully aware he'd just bartered his self-respect for a single head of cattle. Yet when Adelaide Quinn turned the bedroom key that evening, he understood he had no comprehension of what bargain he'd actually struck. The dry spell had shown no mercy. 90 days without precipitation, and Ezekiel's livestock had diminished to mere bones and hide before perishing individually. His property, formerly boasting 100 cattle, now contained nothing except parched soil and shattered aspirations. The bank document, still wadded in his jacket, served as a reminder that 30 days remained before forfeiting everything his predecessor had constructed. That was when Cornelius Slade had presented his proposition. "Wed my child, Adelaide, and I'll provide you the finest breeding animal in these parts," Slade had declared, his golden dental work catching the tavern's faint illumination. "She lacks physical beauty, but possesses a kind soul, and you require livestock more than personal dignity." Ezekiel had gazed into his vacant whiskey tumbler, sensing the stares of every patron in the establishment burning against his shoulders. Everyone understood his circumstances. Everyone knew his desperation made him consider any option. "Is she agreeable?" Ezekiel had inquired softly. "She's 26 and unwed. She understands her circumstances." Slade's laughter held cruelty. "Furthermore, what alternatives do either of you possess?" Standing within the modest timber chapel, Ezekiel glanced toward Adelaide. She donned a plain brown garment that pulled at the fabric, her black hair drawn back harshly. Her countenance was plump and gentle, yet her gaze contained something indiscernible. Not embarrassment, not acceptance, something more acute. The minister's proclamations merged together as Ezekiel contemplated the bovine awaiting in Slade's stable. A Holstein, plump and vigorous, valued beyond everything Ezekiel possessed collectively. It would serve as the cornerstone for reconstructing his livestock, the distinction between continuation and forfeiting the property bearing his lineage. "I accept," Adelaide declared decisively when asked, her tone more powerful than Ezekiel anticipated, his own voice trapped in his windpipe. "I accept." The band was inadequate for Adelaide's digit, but she pushed it on regardless. When the clergyman pronounced them wed, she gazed directly at Ezekiel for the initial time that day. That peculiar expression in her gaze remained, but now appeared almost entertained. The celebration was modest and uncomfortable. Slade's workers consumed food rapidly and departed. The handful of neighbors attending murmured amongst themselves, stealing glimpses at the improbable pair. Ezekiel automatically received felicitations that resembled sympathy more than joy. As twilight neared, Adelaide quietly collected her meager possessions. She owned merely a single threadbare travel bag and a leather-covered volume she gripped firmly. When departure time arrived for Ezekiel's property, she mounted the wagon independently, her mass causing the suspension to creak. The journey to his ranch remained quiet except for wheel sounds and distant coyote calls. Ezekiel continuously thought about the cow, about the opportunity for renewal, about the cost he'd just paid for survival. But when they reached his modest dwelling and Adelaide walked directly to the sleeping chamber, something in her bearing transformed. She moved with intention, not surrender. That's when she rotated the lock, confining them both inside, and Ezekiel realized this evening would differ completely from his expectations. Ezekiel stared at the secured entrance, his hand motionless on the knob. The cramped sleeping chamber felt like a snare now, with Adelaide positioned between him and the sole escape. The individual flame on the bedside table created dancing shadows across her features, rendering her expression incomprehensible. "What are you doing?" he asked, attempting to maintain voice stability. Adelaide didn't respond immediately. Instead, she approached the window and drew the fabric closed, eliminating the moonlight. When she faced him again, something in her posture had completely shifted. The compliant woman from the chapel had vanished. "Be seated," she commanded firmly. Ezekiel felt coldness travel down his backbone. "Adelaide, unlock that entrance immediately." "My identity isn't Adelaide." She opened her travel bag and retrieved a substantial roll of documents. "And I'm not Cornelius Slade's child." The statement struck Ezekiel like a physical impact. He collapsed onto the bed's edge, staring at her. "What?" "My actual name is Catherine Walsh. Adelaide Quinn succumbed to illness 2 years past." She unrolled the documents on the small table. Slade required someone to assume her role for this marriage. Someone desperate enough to perform the part. Ezekiel's thoughts raced. "That's impossible." "Why would you?" "Because Slade owes me something far more precious than cattle." Catherine's voice was freezing. "My father possessed the water privileges to Creek Canyon. Slade murdered him for them 3 years ago. Made it appear like a riding mishap." The room seemed to rotate around Ezekiel. "You're lying." "I possess the evidence right here." She tapped the documents. "Witnesses who observed Slade sabotage my father's saddle. Bank records showing he falsified the water rights transfer. Everything I need to destroy him." Ezekiel rose slowly, his legs unsteady. "Then why marry me? Why this pretense?" "Because Slade is suspicious. He maintains armed guards around him constantly. Never travels anywhere alone." Catherine moved closer, her eyes intense. "But tonight, thinking his problematic daughter is safely wed, he'll be celebrating at Murphy's Tavern, drinking and vulnerable. Adelaide was going to expose him. She discovered my father's murder and threatened to contact the territorial marshal." Catherine's voice softened slightly. "Slade had her poisoned, made it look like fever." Ezekiel felt nauseated. "And you think I'm going to help you kill him? I don't need your assistance killing him." Catherine reached into her travel bag again and produced a small glass container filled with clear liquid. "I need your help ensuring he pays for his actions." The sight of the container made Ezekiel's blood freeze. "Catherine, whatever you're planning." "Justice, Ezekiel. I'm planning justice." She tucked the container into her dress pocket. "Slade murdered 2 people and stole everything my family owned. Tonight he pays." Ezekiel moved toward the entrance again. "I won't be part of this insanity." "You already are." Catherine smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You're married to his daughter, remember? When they find his body tomorrow morning, you'll be the first person they suspect. After all, everyone knows how desperate you were. The trap was perfect, and Ezekiel finally understood why Catherine had looked so entertained during the ceremony. She hadn't been marrying him, she'd been framing him. But what she didn't know was that Ezekiel had secrets of his own. And when she unlocked that door to leave for Slade's murder, she was going to discover that her perfect plan had one fatal flaw. Ezekiel watched Catherine examine the small container one more time, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what she was planning. She had no idea that he'd been expecting this moment for months. Not this exact scenario, but something like it. Something that would finally give him the chance to settle his own score with Cornelia Slade. "You're making a mistake," Ezekiel said quietly. "The only mistake I made was trusting that you'd understand." Catherine moved toward the door, key in hand. "Stay here. When they come asking questions tomorrow, tell them your wife went to visit her father one last time before starting her new life." "Catherine, wait." Ezekiel's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Before you go, there's something you should know about that container." She froze, her hand on the key. "What?" "It's not poison." Ezekiel sat back down on the bed, suddenly looking more relaxed than he had all evening. "It's tinted water with a bit of salt." The color drained from Catherine's face. "That's impossible. I purchased it from the medicine man in Tombstone. He guaranteed it would kill a man in minutes." "The medicine man works for me." Ezekiel smiled for the first time since the ceremony. "Has for 6 months now. Ever since I started tracking down everyone who wanted Slade dead." Catherine's hand trembled as she pulled the container from her pocket, staring at it in disbelief. "You've been watching me." "You're not the only one Slade destroyed, Catherine. The difference is I've been patient. I've been planning." Ezekiel stood up slowly. "That cow he gave me as your dowry? It belonged to my family before the drought. Slade bought my debt from the bank and foreclosed early, then had his men steal my cattle in the night. Then why stop me? Why not let me kill him? Because hanging him would be too quick." Ezekiel walked to the window and looked out toward town. "I want him to lose everything slowly, the way he made us lose everything. His land, his cattle, his reputation. I want him to die a broken man." Catherine clutched the useless container, her perfect plan crumbling around her. "The papers, the witnesses, they're real. I know. I've been collecting evidence against Slade for months. Your father's murder was just one of many crimes." Ezekiel turned back to her. "The territorial marshal is already on his way. Should arrive tomorrow morning with federal warrants." "You used me," Catherine whispered. "We used each other. The difference is my plan doesn't end with either of us swinging from a rope." Ezekiel unlocked the door. "Slade's reign ends tomorrow, but it ends legally." Catherine sank into the chair, the weight of her failed revenge crushing down on her. But as Ezekiel opened the door, the sound of horses approaching fast made them both freeze. "They're coming for us," Catherine breathed. Ezekiel's confidence vanished as he recognized the riders. Slade's men, armed and riding hard toward the cabin. Someone had betrayed them both, and now their carefully laid plans meant nothing. Tonight wasn't going to end with justice or revenge. Tonight was going to end with blood. The thunder of hooves grew louder as Ezekiel extinguished the candle, plunging the bedroom into darkness. Through the window, he could see torches bobbing in the distance, at least 6 riders coming fast. Catherine grabbed his arm, her breath shallow with panic. How did they know? Ezekiel's mind raced through the possibilities. Someone had told Slade about Catherine's real identity, about the fake marriage, about everything. But who? The medicine man was loyal, bought and paid for. The few people who knew about his investigation were trustworthy. The preacher, Ezekiel breathed. Slade owns him. Catherine's grip tightened. What do we do? The evidence. It's hidden under the kitchen floorboards. Ezekiel grabbed his rifle from beside the bed. You take the evidence and hide. No matter what happens, don't come out until morning. What about you? I'm going to give them what they came for. Ezekiel checked his rifle, knowing he had 6 shots against 6 men. Not good odds, but he'd faced worse during the war. They want to fight, they'll get one. Catherine clutched the papers to her chest. Ezekiel, those men will kill you. Maybe, but if I run now, Slade wins everything. Your father stays dead and unavenged. My family's land stays stolen. Adelaide's murder goes unpunished. He looked at her in the darkness. I won't let that happen. The horses were close enough now that they could hear Slade's voice shouting orders. Catherine kissed Ezekiel's cheek quickly, then slipped out of the bedroom toward the kitchen. Ezekiel waited until he heard the cellar door close before moving to the front window. Slade sat on his horse in the yard, torch held high, his face twisted with rage. 5 armed men flanked him, rifles ready. In the flickering light, Ezekiel could see that one of them was the territorial marshal himself, the man who was supposed to arrest Slade tomorrow morning. Ezekiel Marsh. Slade's voice boomed across the yard. I know what you've been planning. Come out now, and we might let you live long enough to stand trial. Ezekiel stepped onto his porch, rifle lowered but ready. Evening, Cornelius. Congratulations on the wedding. Your daughter's quite something. Slade's laugh was ugly. That fat cow isn't my daughter and you know it. Where's Catherine Walsh? Never heard of her. Ezekiel kept his voice steady. My wife Adelaide went to bed early. Long day, you understand? Stop playing games. The marshal spurred his horse forward, badge glinting in the torchlight. We know Catherine Walsh killed the real Adelaide Quinn 2 years ago. We know she's been planning to murder Mr. Slade, and we know you've been helping her. The betrayal hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. The marshal wasn't coming to arrest Slade, he was working with him. Every piece of evidence Ezekiel had gathered, every witness he'd found, every careful plan he'd made over the past 6 months had been reported directly to the man he was trying to destroy. You're all on his payroll, Ezekiel said quietly. Smart man. Slade dismounted, pulling his own rifle. Did you really think you could outsmart me? I've owned this territory for 20 years. I know about every move before it's made. But as Slade stepped closer, confident in his victory, he made the same mistake he'd made with Catherine's father. He underestimated the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Ezekiel raised his rifle as Slade approached, but he wasn't aiming at the man who'd destroyed his life. Instead, he pointed the barrel directly at the torch in Slade's hand. One shot and the yard would plunge into darkness, giving him the advantage he needed. You made one mistake, Cornelius, Ezekiel said, finger on the trigger. What's that? You assumed I was planning to fight fair. Ezekiel fired, and the torch exploded in a shower of sparks. The burning oil splattered across Slade's shirt, sending him stumbling backward, beating at the flames. In the chaos and darkness, Ezekiel dove behind the water trough. The corrupt marshal shouted orders, but before anyone could react, the thunder of approaching horses filled the air. Different horses. Federal horses. The real territorial marshal arrived with 6 federal deputies, their badges gleaming in the moonlight. Drop your weapons, Marshal Hayes commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. This is a federal investigation. The corrupt marshal who'd been working with Slade tried to run, but Catherine stepped out of the cabin holding a lantern and a thick bundle of papers. She'd never hidden in the cellar. Instead, she'd been signaling the real federal agents with the lantern from the kitchen window. Marshal Hayes, Catherine called out clearly. I have documented evidence of murder, theft, and corruption involving Cornelius Slade and Marshall Warren. Slade's men threw down their rifles immediately, realizing they'd been caught in a federal trap. The corrupt Marshall Warren reached for his gun, but Ezekiel was faster. His shot hit Warren's hand, sending the weapon flying into the darkness. Catherine Walsh has been working with federal investigators for 3 months, Marshall Hayes announced as his deputies surrounded Slade's men. Every conversation, every bribe, every threat has been documented. Slade, still smoldering from the burning oil, looked between Catherine and Ezekiel with dawning horror. This was all planned. The marriage was real, Catherine said, walking to stand beside Ezekiel. But Adelaide Quinn was my sister, not Slade's daughter. When she discovered his crimes and threatened to expose him, he had her poisoned. I've been gathering evidence ever since. Ezekiel stared at her. Your sister? Adelaide was trying to help your family retain the water rights when she uncovered Slade's forgeries. She died protecting people she'd never met. Catherine's voice was steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. Tonight was justice for her, for your father, for everyone he destroyed. Marshall Hayes slapped shackles on Slade's wrists. Cornelius Slade, you're under arrest for murder, fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Marshall Warren, you're under arrest for corruption and conspiracy to commit murder. As the federal deputies led the prisoners away, Ezekiel and Catherine stood together in the yard. The ranch was still failing, the drought wasn't over, and they were still married to each other under false pretenses. But Slade's reign of terror was finished. What happens now? Ezekiel asked. Catherine smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Now we rebuild together, the way Adelaide wanted. Ezekiel looked at the woman who'd married him for revenge and discovered something better. Sometimes the greatest treasures come from the most unexpected places. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.